Before servicing any component on the Husky 307 diaphragm pump, you want to make sure of a couple things. First of all, perform a pressure relief procedure outlined within the manual. And disconnect the air supply, disconnect your fluid inlet and outlet. Okay, so now we're going to perform the repair or maintenance of the balls and checks on the Husky 307 diaphragm pump. We're going to start by removing the 4 screws on the top. And before we do that, we'll do a quick reference to the tools. We're going to need a 1/2-inch socket, a torque wrench, and an O-ring pick. So again, we're just going to start by taking the 4 1/2-inch nuts off the top of the diaphragm pump. And once those are off, we can go ahead and lift the outlet manifold off the pump, and we'll just set that aside. We're going to start by removing the outer O-ring, the ball cage, the check ball, the check seat, and then the inner O-ring. All right, and then I'm just going to do the same thing on the other side. All right, once that's done, we're just going to take the diaphragm pump and we're going to turn it over. And we're just going to set it back down, and that's going to force the bolts all the way up, and we're just going to pull the bolts all the way up and out. We'll repeat that for all 4. And we can remove the feet and the inlet manifold. And then these checks now, because the pump is upside down, are going to come off in reverse order. In other words, we've got the inner O-ring, and then the seat, the ball check, the ball cage, and the outer O-ring. And again, we're just going to repeat procedure for the other side. All right, at this time, we've removed the inlet and the outlet manifold, and we've also removed all 4 of the check assemblies. What you want to do at this time is go through and just inspect everything and make sure that there's no damage to the seat or balls or any of the O-rings. If you're just replacing the checks, then we can go ahead and rebuild it. But at this time, what we're going to do, since we're doing a complete rebuild assembly, is we're going to set all this stuff aside. Okay, so now we're going to go ahead and replace the diaphragms. And in order to do that, we're going to have to remove the air valve first. A couple of the tools that we're going to need are going to be 2 1/2-inch sockets, a 7/16 wrench, a Phillips screwdriver, the O-ring pick, and the torque wrench. And we're going to start by removing the air valve. And the reason we're removing the air valve is because we're going to have to pull the diaphragm shaft out. And in order to get the diaphragm shaft out of the pump, the air valve has to be removed because the saddle on the air valve is in contact with the diaphragm shaft. Okay, so now we have all 6 screws out. We're just going to lift the air valve out, and a couple of things you want to pay attention to. Make sure that the air cup is in there and that the bearing has stayed in the cavity as well. If the bearing has come out, you can just put it back in. It's not a big deal. You just want to make sure you know where that bearing is. All right, now that the air valve is off, I'm just going to go ahead and flip the diaphragm pump upside down. And what we're going to do is we're going to loosen these 2 nuts to remove the ground strap. Okay, so now that the nuts have been removed, we can remove the ground strap. And then let the clamps loosen up and move them to the inside and just pull the diaphragm cover off. Repeat for the other side. And then we can go ahead and just remove the clamps completely. Okay, so now we're down to the center section, and here's where we're going to use the 2 1/2-inch sockets. It's recommended to use sockets in this. You don't want to use an open-ended wrench because you run the risk of rounding off these nuts on this plate. So either use a closed-end wrench or a socket. So once one diaphragm comes loose, you can remove the air plate and the diaphragm. And then on the other side, we're just going to go ahead and from this side push the shaft into the cavity and then pull the diaphragm and the shaft all the way out. to remove the last diaphragm, if you look at the diaphragm shaft, you'll notice that there's no flats for a wrench, so you can grab and secure the shaft to remove this last bolt. So what we're going to do is we've added in a small vise here with soft teeth on it. You want to make sure you're using a bench with a vise with some padding so you don't damage this shaft. We'll just take our 1/2-inch wrench and we'll remove that last diaphragm. Down inside behind the bearing is going to be an O-ring, and there's going to be one on each side. So we're just going to take our O-ring pick, and I push that one down through the center so it's laying right into the cavity of the center section. And we'll repeat the process for the other side. All right, the last thing you want to do is make sure that you inspect everything, inspect the diaphragm shaft, inspect the bearings. If there's any damage or wear, you're going to want to replace the shaft and the bearing. We're not going to be replacing the bearing today, but in order to replace that bearing, all you're going to need is a 13/32 easy out to push in there and then turn those bearings out. All right, so that completes our teardown. The next step is going to be to build everything back up.